Our program today will be moderated by Dale Munoz. And I've got to say, the minute Dale walked in, I heard the voice because I hear him every day at 11 o'clock on the farm report. So Dale, I'm going to turn the program over to you. Thanks.
Well, if you're looking for the farm report, the markets are mixed. Give it plus or minus 6 for the last 2 months, and you're pretty well covered everything, so we can skip the rest of that and move on. So, our panel's coming to the stage. We have limited time today, so we're going to see how much we can get into this for you. The topic for today is algae, and what are we doing about it? How does it affect our farms? Hopefully it will be a discussion that you'll be able to take some things home from and understand it's not quite as easy to pick and choose what's necessarily the next thing to do. The continued amount of research is going on, a number of dollars, organizations, and outsiders watching how we handle this and what we do. We have the panel selected in front of us. They were all put together. They were sent some questions to be ready for. We're going to ask them to spend 1.5 to 2 minutes kind of giving the opening idea of who they represent and the answer to the first question, which is, what is the problem? Before they do that, and we allow them to get settled in, let me see if I can paint this picture for you just a little bit. Once upon a time, the International Race of Champions was designed to be run so that every country in the world that manufactured a car was able to enter one race at one time, and once and for all, we could decide who builds the best car in the world. Well, come race day, only 2 countries showed up with an entry, the United States and Russia. Upon watching the race, U.S. was actually accused of slowing down to make the race look closer. U.S. reporter, upon watching the race, writes home to his readership, U.S. enters world-class car race, comes in first. Russia comes in next to last. Well, you see, there was a Russian reporter at the same race. And because he was doing his job that he was supposed to do for the day, he wrote home to his readership, Russia enters world-class car race, comes in second. United States comes in next to last. You see, any one point that you either know the information about or you don't may change the way you see the story. So please keep in mind today, as we try to bring you some of the discussion that's currently happening, it is an ongoing move to better understand how to keep our water clean, how to do a good job of representing our industry, and how to protect and preserve for our future. So, I don't have a preference which way we go, so Karl, you're sitting on this end. You're the closest victim I have, so how about we turn the clock over to you for a couple minutes to tell us about who you're representing today and the answer to the first question.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dale. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. It's a very fitting setting next to the Scioto River and the confluence. Shout out to John O'Meara, a longtime friend, and good seeing him here today, too. What is the problem? Well, the problem is this issue right here, as Dale alluded to. We have some issues in Ohio. For the most part, we have very good water. We have an abundance of water, and both groundwater as well as surface water. But from time to time, we do have some issues that come up. And at first, it started at Grand Lake St. Mary's over in western Ohio. And then we started seeing some other issues in some of our inland lakes. And then lo and behold, Lake Erie started. And then last summer, of all places, Ohio River had its first bloom of algae, and the toxin that is produced by that, microcystin, which is a neurological toxin. And so we now have a statewide issue, and it's just not in Ohio. We have the situation really across the world. And one of the things that I'm representing the administration, I'm with the Ohio EPA, I'm Deputy Director of Water Resources and Lake Erie Programs. Our focus, my focus, is really in working with Lake Erie. But a lot of the practices and programs that we're going to be implementing up on Lake Erie, we're going to be able to implement statewide. And that includes the Ohio River and working with our neighbors to the south, as well as working to our neighbors to really the west and the north, in Indiana, Michigan, and Ontario as it relates to Lake Erie. Lake Erie is not just Ohio's problem, and it's just not going to be Ohio that solves that problem. We are engaging in what we're referring to as the Western Lake Erie Basin Collaborative, which Governor Kasich signed in June, and we're cooperating with Michigan and Ontario, as well as working with Indiana in trying to find First of all, some of the causes for what the problem is, and then putting together a strategy to address those problems. And the problems are coming from several sources. One is what we term non-point, where we don't know. It just flows off the land. There's
30
not
seconds
a pipe.
remaining.
30 seconds is great. We have a pipe. That's the point source. That's a wastewater treatment plants, industrial discharge. It's a combined sewer overflow. So we know where the discharge is coming from. So we're trying to address both of those issues simultaneously and putting practices in place that are economically reasonable, but will also help address the issue of improving water quality by reducing the amount of nutrients going into our water.
Next up, Terry McClure. Terry.
Well, thanks, Dale, and thanks to the Rotary for lifting up this important issue and giving us an opportunity, because one of the things we need to do is keep sharing with the public and understand what we are doing in Ohio. So our farm is about an hour straight east of Fort Wayne, Indiana. We sit in the heart of what is known as the Great Black Swamp, and my entire farm sits on the floor of a prehistoric lake bed. So to say drainage is important to me is an understatement. So I am a fifth generation farmer. I farm with my dad, who's 80, still farms with us, and my son is beginning farming with us. I currently am chairman of the Ohio Soybean Council. That's a group that represents all farmers that raise soybeans across the state, and our farmers set aside 0.5% of their gross every year to do research and education, and certainly this has been a topic that we've been involved in for a very long time. Just to build on the problem, and as we talk about the problem, one of the problems is we've got a 4 million acre watershed here in the state that flows into a very shallow spot that I've referred to a couple times as almost a petri dish because of its size and its shallowness, and it tends to be fairly warm. The acreage we have there is fairly flat. When we get a big rain, we do have runoff, and it's always been interesting and we have a heavy clay calloid soil that tends to move nutrients with us. So that's one of the issues we have on the farm.
30 seconds remaining.
My understanding is the Maumee River, which is our main drainage area, in Indian means muddy. So this isn't a new issue. It's a long-term issue that area has been dealing with. We in agriculture have been trying to attack the problem for a long time, but part of the issue is just the natural setting that we're in. The other issue that I would point out, this is one of the few places in the country where we have an algae issue that it's primarily crop agriculture. We do have some livestock in the area, but certainly the majority of our area from an agricultural standpoint is crop agriculture.
Thank you, Terry. Dr. Larry Antosch.
Thanks, Dale. I'll come in on this through a little different perspective in that I have a half acre turf grass operation up here in Clintonville, and so between the little garden spot, garden in the back, and a large oak tree, so we have some free range squirrels running around, and all that. But I work for the Ohio Farm Bureau, and we represent farmers and non-farmers, individuals who are interested in agriculture and agriculture-related activities across the state. And we have been working on addressing the water quality, nutrient management issues for many years, working with our partners and with the other agricultural commodity groups and the other folks across the state to come up and look at issues and identify solutions to some of these problems that we're seeing. As Karl and Terry mentioned, the harmful algal bloom issue is a statewide issue. Actually, it is, again, reiterate, statewide, Midwest, national, international. IJC just recently put out a nice little study showing Lake of the Woods up in northern Ontario last summer with the major algal bloom occurring up in that area. So we're seeing this across the state, the region, the nation, and the world in terms of harmful algal blooms. Primary concern is that we start getting into nutrient management issues or concerns. We get into human health concerns because of the toxins. And so what we're really looking at is what kinds of solutions, what can we do to deal with the off-site transport of nutrients, dissolved reactive phosphorus and nitrogen. The biggest wild card,
30 seconds remaining.
biggest wild card that we have is what I called weather weirding. Changing weather patterns. We're seeing the short duration, high intensity storms causing runoff events not only from the agricultural areas, but in the urban areas, increased combined sewer overflows, stormwater runoff from the land. And so the big challenge we have is how do we weatherproof the watersheds so that we can reduce that off-site runoff. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Ken?
I was born in Cuyahoga County on a small truck farm up there, and we were milking 3 cows. Now, 3 cows don't make a whole lot of manure. But in 1955, Dad decided he wanted a dairy farm. We moved to Medina County, and that's where my connection with dairy farming started. In 1975, my wife and I decided to dairy farm on our own, and we bought a dairy farm and we started milking 30 cows. Again, 30 cows don't make a whole lot of manure. But economics change in the farming community, and you have to expand because margins get smaller, and we are now at 130 cows. Now, we have another dilemma facing us. My son wants to come into the operation, and he says, Dad, 130 cows aren't enough. We need to go to 250 cows. Now, just to give you a little statistic, and these are just kind of rough numbers, a cow eats 100 pounds of feed a day. They make about 100 pounds of milk. That's what ours are doing. But they also make about 100 pounds of manure a day. Now, we live on where our farm is. We're at the top of a watershed. On one side of the farm, it goes to the Mohican, which runs through Loudonville, and the other part of the farm runs into the Kokosing, which goes through Mount Vernon. So we're at the top of the watershed. And whatever we put on our soil is going to ultimately, if there's runoff, going to end up downstream. So one of the things we're looking at is how do we apply manure, which these fellows don't have that problem, and apply it in a manner that's not going to pollute the streams. Now with 130 cows, we've done pretty good. But with 250 cows, we've got to make some major changes. And the changes we're going to make, I think we'll get into with the solutions. I think one of the important things of meeting with groups like this, and I've been talking to Rotary and Kiwanis groups for the last 4 years, or you got me mixed up here, 4 years, is we have to make a connection with the non-farm community. We can tell you what the problem is, and it's just like giving you directions to some place. For example, if I tell you, go into town, take the first road to your right, go 2 streets, go past the church, make a turn to the left, go down that street, and the street you want is the 4th street on the right. Now, can you refer that back to me? You probably can. But if we take you by the hand, take you out to the farm, and show you exactly what's going on, and show you what we're doing, you'll have a better understanding.
Thank you, Ken. As we move on then, let's move to our second question, and we'll start this one with Terry and move across. What are the causes as we understand them at this point?
Well, and there's some of them have been mentioned. There's a wide range of causes, but what we've come to find out is the latest is dissolved reactive phosphate is what's actually getting to the water, referred to as DRP, and we'll try not to get too technical because I'll get over my own head. But certainly we know a couple things. We know, we know that DRP is the cause of this algae. It's its favorite food, and that's what it drives off. We know ag runoff can be a part of this. We know our combined sewer overflows that was mentioned can be a part of it. Rural septic, nutrient already in the lake, it runs the gamut. But one point I'd kind of like to make from an ag standpoint is how agriculture has been looking at this. Agriculture has said, look, we can argue whether we're 30, 40, whatever percent of the problem we are, but if we're a part of the problem, we need to be a part of the solution. And all of our organizations have been involved across the state in working on a lot of the issues. One of the things we do need to point out from an ag standpoint is if you look at a chart on our phosphate use, if you go back to 1975 to today, that on a chart looks like this. It's going down. We know the total amount of phosphate that's being used in the watershed because that's kept track of the sales. But around 1990, the DRP started going up like this. And as the algae bloom started, our ag organizations got involved and said, look, there's got to be something here we're missing that we don't understand, and we want to understand the problem, and that's where we're at right now.
Okay, Larry?
We know that blue-green algae thrive and outcompete other algae when the conditions are perfect for them. Nutrient-rich, warm water, sunlight, and calm water. The weather conditions that we've been seeing over the past several years are perfect for growing blue-green algae. They outcompete the green algae. The blue-green algae are not something that's new. They've been around as long as all the other algae have been around. It's just that we're creating conditions that make it perfect for them to grow. We start thinking about what's causing the harmful algal blooms, and there was an article published in the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation. It was by Doug Smith, Kevin King, and Mark Williams. They've gone through and identified almost 30 different theories on things that, from an agricultural perspective, that could be leading to the growth and the harmful algal blooms that we're seeing in our lakes around Ohio and around the nation, really. On top of that, you can probably make a similar list with some of the other sources of dissolved reactive phosphorus, the urban areas, the combined sewer overflows, the home sewage treatment, the septic tank, leach fields, things on that nature. So we have to, one, remember and recognize that the cause of the harmful algal blooms is really a complex situation. We really don't have one specific answer that we can identify or a cause that we can identify as causing the issue, which makes addressing the issue that much more complex also. Some other recent work that was being conducted up at Stone Lab is beginning to look at the nitrogen the impact or the influence that nitrogen plays in the harmful algal blooms. We know that we need nitrogen and phosphorus are two key elements for things to grow. That's why we fertilize our plants at the home, why we fertilize our grass, why we fertilize the crops that we're growing. The research is showing, though, that the form of nitrogen, the form of dissolved nitrogen, is having an influence not only on plant growth, but on the creation of the microcystin toxin itself. And that nitrate in the water tends to influence the amount of microcystin. If you look at the chemical structure of microcystin, you can see where nitrate would favor that. And the ammonia aspect influences growth. So not only are we dealing with an issue that's a phosphorus-related issue, it's also nitrogen has a role to play in the situation. So we have a nutrient management concern. We need to be able to look at and try to reduce the amount and the off-site transport of nutrients, both nitrogen and phosphorus, from our landscape, wherever that landscape is.
Thank you, Larry. Ken?
Just from a farmer's perspective, farms are getting bigger, livestock farms are having more concentrated livestock. The challenge of getting the livestock waste deposited on the land is a bigger challenge, and deposited and put on the soil in a way that's not going to contaminate a stream of water, or in northwestern Ohio, get into Lake Erie. One of the things that we're looking at are different ways of handling the manure. Currently, since we're going to 250 cows, that's what my son tells me we're doing, we're in the process of putting in 4.5 million gallons of manure storage, which we can then time the time of the year that we want to apply this. And we're also looking at ways of applying this and maybe injecting it in the soil so there is no runoff. The other thing that I see, and it's helping to fight the erosion that we have, are a lot of farmers are putting in cover crops that stop some of the erosion. And as we drive around the countryside, my wife and I, being from Medina County, we run through Wayne County, Ashland County, Medina County, and Holmes County, and we see a lot of different practices being used to control this. So livestock waste is a big problem, and it's something that we're working on all the time to try and to solve.
Karl?
As already been mentioned, there's various sources of the nutrients, and as Larry said, we really have had perfect growing conditions for this plant in Lake Erie and a lot of our other bodies of water. I mean, think of it as almost miracle grow being put into Lake Erie when you have heat, and the conditions have really been perfect. So while we often talk about nutrient management, I think we're also having to talk about water management, because we, through Heidelberg's research for almost 30 years now, on the Maumee and a lot of the tributaries in northwest Ohio, there's a direct correlation between the flow and the loading of nutrients. And if we can start managing the water as it's going into the streams and the flashiness, I think that will also help in managing some of those nutrients, regardless of where the sources are. Now, we talk about point source and non-point source. The point source being that pipe, as I talked about. Well, there are times when the system becomes overloaded, and Columbus deals with that. It's combined sewer overflow. That's why they're building the tunnel, and now they're going above ground and doing a lot of the rain gardens and some other containment practices to try to slow down the amount of water coming into the system that gets overloaded and then flows into the river, sometimes containing raw sewage. So we really are dealing with not only the nutrient issue as it relates to the application on the land or in the wastewater discharge, but also managing that water. The other issue as far as, well, where is it coming from and what percent? It is kind of tricky. The one thing we do have going for us is the Ohio EPA monitors and permits all discharge under the National Pollution Elimination Discharge System, NPDES permits. So we can monitor and permit the amount of effluent from a wastewater treatment plant going into whatever that receiving body is. So we can gather that data, and then we have what we call a total maximum daily load. It goes into a river system, and if we can stay, below that load, the river is going to be in better shape, put it in layman's terms. So we can monitor what's going in from the point sources. Then we can extrapolate that amount from what the total load is going into that stream and make a pretty good educated assumption that here's what's coming from the non-point. Now, we can't separate out the non-point as it relates to home septic systems, in which some cases, some communities have 100% failure of home septic systems and not functioning property. We can't separate that from what's coming off an ag field, nor can we separate it from some of the other sources of non-point. So a key issue to this, and it's going to kind of get into the solutions, is being able to monitor where are these sources coming from. And I know Ohio State and Farm Bureau and a lot of the ag commodity groups are doing edge of field monitoring. So we know what's coming in off the farm field the same way we know what's going out from some of the point source discharges. This information is going to be very important so we can start applying practices to the ground, verifying their effectiveness, and how that's related to the overall water quality going into a stream, ultimately into Lake Erie or some other body of water.
Okay, everybody take a deep breath, because we're on the second half of the question series. I also remind you, I grew up in Southeast Ohio. Our only goal when it came to water was slow it down, because the faster it goes, the more it takes with it. I got to college and found out there was a lot of guys from Northwest Ohio, and their only goal was to speed it up, because when it's sitting here, we can't do anything with it. And we're still dealing with the same concept of water movement yet today. Now, Larry, you're going to be first up on question 3. What are the suggested solutions as you see them?
Thanks, Dale. Principally, one of the things we have to think about is how do we reduce the delivery of nutrients from all sources to our waterways. Sounds simple, sounds easy, but we are dealing with a very complex situation. We also have to realize that there's a concept that doesn't really get talked about a lot, is lag time. It just takes time for natural systems to readjust to what we're doing, just like it takes time to build a deep tunnel or it takes time to build a manure storage. It takes time, and the system will take time to readjust. So we have to remember that as we start thinking about solutions, there's some things we can do right away. They may not show up in the monitoring that we need to have, long-term monitoring that we need to have, but we can still be tracking land changes or land management changes. Terry's opened up his farm for an edge-of-field monitoring site. We're trying to evaluate what are the conservation practices that are the most effective from an environmental standpoint, from an economic standpoint. We've got to keep Terry and Ken in business. We can't come up with solutions that are going to put them out of business. We all want cheap, affordable, plentiful, safe food. So we have to make sure that the solutions that we come up with maintain those principles also. So we want to look at some of this edge-of-field monitoring and evaluate management practices or management changes and their effectiveness on reducing the off-site transport of nutrients, and also what the impact they have on economic bottom line. We've been putting a lot of attention, and we need to continue to keep attention to the principles of 4R nutrient stewardship. And again, applying the right source of nutrient at the right rate, the right time, in the right place. Making sure that you're only putting on what you need to grow the crop that you're growing, and at a time of the year when it's not going to be leaving the fields. You think about what's happening up in the Western Lake Erie Basin, and it's not that the farmers are losing a lot of nutrients. A pound, maybe a pound per acre, but you're dealing with 4 million acres. So a pound per acre, so a little bit from a large area adds up. So how do you cut that back to even a half a pound? Not as easy, Dove, if you remember, ivory soap was never 100% pure. Ivory soap, getting that little bit out is not as easy as it may seem. So in terms of solutions or in terms of programs, where are we at? What are we promoting? We're looking at soil testing and following the tri-state nutrient recommendations. Again, recommendations that were developed from Ohio State, Michigan State, and Purdue in terms of nutrient recommendations for the crops that you're growing. We have some ongoing research we're supporting, and the commodity groups are supporting, looking at those, making sure that those recommendations are up to date and are current with the current varieties of crops that are out there.
30 seconds
Okay.
remaining.
We want to look at the placement of nutrients, making sure that nutrients are placed in the soil, not laying on top of the surface. We want to make sure that we're applying nutrients at times when they have the lowest potential for off-site transport, so avoiding that wintertime frozen snow covered when ground is saturated or when rainfall is coming. And also, as Karl mentioned, there's some things we want to look at in terms of disconnecting or working on the hydrologic pathways. How can we slow water movement from not only surface runoff but subsurface runoff?
Ken, you mentioned some cover crops earlier and some ways to manage the manure on a timely basis. What else would you add?
Well, we have hills in Knox County too, so we know where the water runs. And what we've been involved in our farm for the last couple of years is maintaining waterways. And this is where the water comes from a field, comes together. And we've worked with soil conservation in building these waterways wide enough and long enough to slow that water down to keep it from getting in the streams. Anytime water runs through a waterway, that's grass, that's a deep sod, that filters a lot out. The other thing that we've done is made a real effort to plant cover crops. If you would come to my farm today, you would see the majority of the farm not only has alfalfa and hay crops on it, but it also has cover crops. We seeded rye in the fall of the year. The rye is about 4 to 6 inches high, which filters the water real well. And that's one of the things that we're doing to try and control that. And again, mentioning the manure storage that we're building, we want to try and time the application of that so it isn't applied during the winter time.
Karl? I think the first thing is we have to stop admiring the problem. You know, we have to stop talking about the problem. We know that Lake Erie is a problem. We know we have to start doing something, but it's very easy to sit around, come to a meeting, we talk about it, and then we all go home. And I think that's really where the governor was when he wanted to implement this Western Lake Erie Basin Collaborative. There's an agreement, Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement between the United States and Canada to work on this issue as well, but there wasn't an implementation plan scheduled until 2018. The governor said that's not soon enough. We have to get moving quicker. And so that's where this Western Lake Erie Basin Collaborative resulted from, working with Michigan, Ontario, and Indiana, in putting in place programs and practices that will address this issue from multiple facets. It's based on really 3 concepts. One is implementation. We have to start doing things. We may not have all the research, we may not have all the data we need to get practices on the ground or improvements in the wastewater treatment plants, but we have to start doing something. And as Director Craig Butler of the EPA says, we have to start building the airplane as it's going down the runway. We can't wait until we have all of the data in order to take action. Verification. We have to verify that, first of all, practices are being put in place. And again, whether that's on the farm or in the wastewater treatment plant, in the combined sewer overflows, we have to verify that activity and action is taking place at the local level, which is where this is going to happen. We also have to be accountable. We have to start holding ourselves accountable for what's going on and what we have to do and what our role is in this. As Terry and everyone else has said, everyone has a piece of this action, and it's just not at this table, it's Indiana, Michigan, and Ontario as well. And so we have to hold them accountable the same way we need to expect to be held accountable. And finally, we have to look at patience. We have to hope that the public will be patient, because it's tough not being able to take your grandkids to Lake Erie to go swimming. It's tough if you're a charter boat captain having your clients cancel because of what they hear in the media, what's going on Lake Erie. And I'll tell you folks, we have another situation like Toledo, 500,000 people going without water. Attitudes are going to change very quickly. And so we have to work to try to avoid that and put in practices that are going to reduce the amount of nutrients going in, but also treatment processes to address these issues potentially affecting drinking water. So it's going to take some time, but we have to start moving forward and taking actions.
Thank you, Karl. Terry?
This is one of those all-hands-on-deck type issues. Everyone in the state, everyone in this room, every business, every farm, every town is a part of the problem. Maybe minute, maybe a lot, it depends. But we need to have an all-hands-on-deck type attitude towards it, and I believe we do. And we've been working towards that. You know, it's kind of interesting, just to throw another piece out. The first thing we got about was trying to get understanding. Field edge testing was one of the first things we did, and we said, you know, not saying I don't know is not a good answer on how this is, on what's leaving our farm. Folks were doing a great job modeling at the mouth of the river or even back at the tributaries, but it was just modeling. And so this field edge testing is attempting to pinpoint 365, 24/7, exactly what's leaving our field under what conditions. But you know, the first thing we had to do was talk to our farmers. Because our farmer says, look, I went to no-till, I fixed this, because we've been here before. In the 1980s, we had quite a particulate phosphate problem in our lakes and our tributaries. And folks like the Soil and Water Conservation Districts and Natural Resources Conservation Service helped us learn how to no-till. We threw the plow away. And we started not tilling our soil, because if we leave that residue there, when the waters come, the soil doesn't run off, and we're protecting that. So the first thing we had to do is have a conversation with our own people to say, yeah, we did that, that was good, but now there's more to do, and a lot more to do. So we really started working on those issues. You know, the other piece that's been so important on our farm is just getting an understanding of when we apply our nutrient and how it gets applied. One of the things we've learned from the field edge testing is incorporation makes a big difference. I mean, we've learned two things. We need to keep our soil tests, which is the basis of all the work that we do, but we need to keep our soil test levels inside of a range that are the suggested agronomic range. When we get above that range, it moves much easier from our soil. The other thing we needed to remind ourselves, and it's maybe kind of one of those offsetting problems with no-till, we changed the way we tilled our soil. We didn't necessarily change the way we applied our nutrients. So whether it's on my grain crop side of my farm or whether it's on my livestock side of my farm, sometimes I was just throwing the nutrient on top, much like you would do maybe in your garden, just throw it in your yard. But it wasn't necessarily becoming a part of the soil. We used to call that plow down back in the day. My grandpa would have called any fertilizer plow down. There was a reason. We put it on, we plowed it into the soil, it became a part of the soil. Because we don't till the soil as much anymore, we were throwing it on top. So we had totally changed the way we farm, trying to fix one problem, but we hadn't changed the way we applied nutrient. So there's been a lot of learnings here from the field edge that says, okay, maybe we got to find a happy medium here, and maybe we have to do some light tillage, or maybe we have to use different ways of injecting our nutrient into the soil. More than you want to know about some of these issues, but it's to say they're a moving target. There's a lot of parts and pieces to it. All of us wish we had a silver bullet, that we could just say, if we fix this one thing, it goes away. This is 1,000 issues coming together. Any one of them on any day can be the main issue that we need to work on. So the only answer is to work on all of them collaborative.
All right, I'm going to throw you a little bit of curve on the last two questions. I'm going to have our farmers answer number 5, Terry and Ken, and I'm going to have Karl and Larry answer the question number 4, and we'll do that one first. How are we progressing toward fixing the problem? And we should have about 8 to 10 minutes left at the end for questions if you want to be formulating one as well. So let's go with first on our how are we progressing toward fixing the problem, and we'll start with Karl on that one.
Well, we are making progress. I mean, this isn't something that we've just been sitting around trying to figure out what to do. There's been a lot of activities that has been going on for quite a while. In fact, we're using a base year as part of our collaborative. And by the way, the goal for that is a 40% reduction by 2025 in Lake Erie, 20% reduction by 2020. That's the goal that we've set out for ourselves. Not just the goal, but the timeline. And that's very important. We have to have a timeline, or we're just going to continue this. The 2008, we're using that as our base year in which to measure progress. And we've had a lot of data gathered. And the scientists, the smart people in the room, they have said that if we can, 9 out of the 10 years, achieve a loading into Lake Erie like we had in 2008, we're not going to eliminate the problem, but the problem's going to be tolerable. It's not going to be nearly as bad as we had, say, this year, which was the highest algae bloom we had in Lake Erie in history. Now, the irony, and to show you how this is a moving target, we had the largest algae bloom in Lake Erie this year, but the lowest concentrations of microcystin. And so, again, you kind of scratch your head where we've had low levels of algae and high levels of microcystin in the past. So this truly is a moving target. But I think we are making progress, and we're going to really start ramping that up. We are going to be coming out with a plan March 1st, and then another for public comment, and then a finalized version, what I'm referring to as the first rendition, because this plan will change. As we get more information, more data, we will have to adjust through an adaptive management process what we do and how we approach this issue. So there's been a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of good science applied up to this point, but we can't stop. We have to keep going because obviously we haven't fixed the problem. So we're either, it takes longer than we think, or what we're doing isn't necessarily the right thing that we're doing, and we have to make some adjustments in those processes. So that's what we're looking at. We, as Terry has said, we're done pointing fingers. This isn't just an ag problem. It's not just a wastewater treatment plant. We all have a stake in this. It's important to everyone, whether you're a farmer and you want to go to Lake Erie, or you're sitting down here in Columbus and you want to go to Lake Erie. No one wants Lake Erie in that condition. And so the biggest, I think, thing that we have achieved lately, Terry, has been we don't point fingers anymore. We're all working together at this and trying to find out how we can best address this issue.
Larry?
I'd like to build off of what Karl was talking about or mentioning. Over the past couple of years, there were two recently passed pieces of legislation that you may think, well, why would the agricultural community favor legislation? But these are good pieces that there was good support on. One of them, Senate Bill 150. When Senate Bill 150 passed, Ohio became the first state in the nation to require anyone who's applying commercial fertilizer on more than 50 acres to be certified by the state of Ohio. Sit through a class. There's a 3-hour class that you sit through. The classes are put on by Ohio State University Extension. Certification program is run through Ohio Department of Agriculture. So if you're applying commercial fertilizer on 50 or more acres for agricultural production, you are to be certified. And by 2017, if you're not certified, you're in violation. First piece. Second piece, and that's a statewide piece of legislation. The other piece was Senate Bill 1 that was passed primarily, it's up in the western Lake Erie Basin, and that's really looking at putting restrictions on the time when you can apply either commercial fertilizer or manure. Again, looking at those high-risk times when it's a frozen or snow-covered condition, or when it's a rainfall event coming, or the ground is saturated. Those are the times when there's a higher potential for off-site transport, and so we want to avoid that. In terms of going back to that certification program, last year over 6,000 farmers in Ohio were certified. One of the things that Ohio Farm Bureau did was we put a lot of effort, and we created got a lot of abuse about this too, because we had an outlandish goal of saying that by Earth Day of last year, so within a year of the legislation going through, that we would have everyone in the western Lake Erie Basin that should be certified. We knew we weren't going to meet that target, but we wanted to demonstrate the fact how important this was to the Ohio Farm Bureau and to the agricultural community, that we get as many individuals certified as soon as we could. In addition to that, the Agribusiness Association has an industry-led program. Again, this is an independent third-party audit for those individuals that provide services to Ohio farmers. Either they are doing the developing nutrient management plans, they're applying fertilizer, doing their scouting. And so we have, within the western Lake Erie Basin, there are 25 locations that have been certified over 1 million acres, being under the guidance of individuals that work at those facilities. And by agribusinesses, we mean the grain elevators, the fertilizer distributors, things on that nature. So again, individuals are going out and making sure that they're following the principles of 4R nutrient stewardship. There's been some other activities taking place. The recent Farm Bill had a component to it, the RCPP, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Ohio went into with Indiana and Michigan, $17.5 million project, putting, again, action on the ground, practices on the ground to address nutrients and sediment issues. In Ohio, there's, in the first round, there were 81 contracts that were taking place, the individuals signed up and participated in. I think the biggest challenge, one of the things, are we making progress, is this whole, how do we match expectations versus reality? We understand that we have a complex situation here. Lots of moving parts, as Terry mentioned. Lots of different things happening. Just from the ag perspective, could be almost one of 30 or 40 different things going on. They all have a role to play. Mother Nature gives us an experiment every year with climate change, or climate weather weirding, rather than climate change, but the extreme events that we're seeing and the impact that that has on us. We know that there's a lag time that takes place between when we do action and the system responds. We need that long-term monitoring and evaluation in order to know that we're making progress. We can track the land use changes, but we want to be able to track the environmental changes and the environmental impact. And that's where the adaptive management aspect comes into play. And if we don't, and we have to make sure that we address this from a comprehensive standpoint, making sure that all sources, all stakeholders have a role to play, and they do take a role to play on this. And so, yes, we are making progress. Whether or not we get to someone saying, well, if we do this today, we won't see this issue tomorrow. Systems don't work that quickly, unfortunately. But hopefully we'll be able to say, by doing these practices, by making these changes, we'll be able to see a difference here in the next few years.
Okay, let's go to the fifth question. Ken, how will the current plans to fix the problem work for you in Knox County, and how do they affect your farm?
I think the best way to explain this would be explaining how my wife views this. She's been the love of my life for 48 years, and she's been my partner in farming for that long. And when this whole issue of manure management came up and we said we needed to do a better job, we needed a way to store manure and be able to apply it at a more opportune time, she said, okay, that's fine. Well, then we started the construction projects. And let's face it, building those lagoons and setting up a manure handling system to handle that from the cows, it's a $500,000 investment. And my son said originally, well, we can do it with 200 cows. Well, as the expenses got bigger, it was 250 cows. And she's looking out the window, and I walk in for lunch, and she says, do you know how many concrete trucks went by today? And she sees the dollar bills. Now, we're going to succeed, but it's a big change in how we operate. We're going to have to hire a little more help. We're going to have to change our operations. We have to be more efficient. I'm almost 69 years old. You know, what am I doing expanding and working harder? Well, I told my son, you're going to take over more of this. But the reality is, to implement some of these changes, particularly from the livestock end, it's expensive. And we have to do it to stay in business. Unfortunately, the big buildings that go up to handle the additional cows, when people drive down the road, they say, well, that's more of a factory farm. But we're still a family farm. So we've got an image to work with also. It isn't just a little red barn with a loafing shed off to the side. It's a big barn, and it's got manure storage, and it's a whole different perspective for people driving by, for people that are not connected with the farm. So that's how it affects us. It's financially, but we feel it's something necessary. And if you look at my biography here, I've got 5 grandsons, and I know at least 3 of them are interested in the farm. If we want to continue farming, we've got to do something like this and hopefully have enough confidence in the next generations to carry that on.
Terry, I don't want to cut you too short, but can you do it in 2 minutes so we got some time for questions?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, Ken's exactly right. And Ken, what Ken was giving you was an example, and all of our farms are working on a lot of different issues right now. And they've taken it to heart, because it is our lake and it is our stream. And we believe that we're leaving our land better than we found it. That's most of our goal. And most of us have the next generation coming along. A couple things that we're doing on our farm that may be a little unique. We've kind of asked ourselves the question, what percentage of time do we have something growing on our farm? And you've heard people talk about cover crops. We're leaning back towards small grain a little bit, because if you think about it, if we're just in a 2-year corn bean rotation, we plant that sometime in April or May, sometime around August or September, it starts to ripen. And you know, if I had a teaspoonful of healthy soil right here, I'm told there's 1 billion organisms in that teaspoon of soil, if it's healthy. And when there's nothing growing on my farm, some of that bacteria that is doing a great job of holding that nutrient in that soil, making it available for the next crop, it releases some of that nutrient. So the longer I can have something growing on my farm, so when I plant wheat in the fall, it's there till July. There's only and if I put a cover crop right after that, and that is there. You know, we believe we can get up to, 65% of the time we have something growing on our soil rather than, frankly, less than a quarter of the time at times. So we think that's a piece we're looking at. All different kind of pieces, many of them have been mentioned, from cover crop to filter strips. But the number one thing we've done is we've recognized it. And not only did I get certified, and it only takes one per farm, but all the employees, everybody that works on our farm went to the certification class, because I can't run every piece of equipment on the farm, and they need to understand what the issues are here, because it's part of their livelihood too. So,
Thank you. First, let's give our panel a round of applause. My email said we were supposed to be done about 1 o'clock, but you want to be out here by 1:05. Is there one burning question or two somebody wants? Yes, you had your first hand up.
Having been involved in planning and zoning in southern Delaware County, I know there are a lot of complications involved with having more urban creep into farmland. But with respect to this specific issue, how much of a complication is added, or does it help or hurt when you have subdivisions coming in adjacent to farmland that have storm sewer systems and all of that, which might accelerate that water?
Which one of you wants to address that? Because we're not going to have time for much more, other than to say we're all a group and working together.
Well, I think Delaware County's done an excellent job in terms of making sure that as that development takes place, the Soil and Water District's done a very good job on making sure then that the ag drainage that's already in place gets protected and maintained. Because the two, as they start reaching out and touching each other, could be some conflicts if not well designed. So Delaware County has done a very, very good job on dealing with that issue. Other than if it's home sewage issues, again, making sure that that could be another nutrient source, something we have to make sure that home sewage treatment systems are adequately sited and put in, designed for the conditions on the soil, on the lot. The soil drives what we grow on the crop fields. The soil should drive the appropriateness of whatever home sewage treatment system gets put into place.
I'm told there's no snow on the ground. We have a chance for one more question, because you guys are all fast drivers. Okay, this guy saw this hand first. I'm sorry.
I notice a lot of tile drainage is being installed in Knox County. Will this help the situation by making the soil absorb the nutrients better?
You want to take, who wants to go on that? Tile drainage, there's more tile drainage being installed in several counties, but his observation was in Knox County. How will this affect the situation?
I'm not quite sure how it's going to address what the tiling that you see in Knox County is in particularly wet areas, and that really shouldn't affect it one way or the other. Terry, maybe you've got a different opinion.
yeah, I suppose I sit in the drainage capital of the world, and most of the tile that's manufactured in this state, the plastic tile, are manufactured within 10 miles of my house. So we're the center of that industry. Two things. There is a lot going on. I will say drainage is the number one thing to soil health. You can't have a healthy soil if it's laying underwater. Those bacteria will not survive. You'll have compaction, and then everything else we're trying to do, we spend the same amount of money, but we don't get the yield back. So the number one thing I can do on my soil is make sure it's properly drained. We know from the field edge testing that in any gallon of water that comes out of a tile compared to the gallon of water that comes off the surface, there's less nutrient in that. We also know on a well-tiled field, more of the water comes off through the tile than it does over the surface. I've said every time, I don't have to be too smart to see where my tile water and where my surface water join, and one is almost perfectly clear and the other one's very muddy, that I'm doing some good with my tile. So we believe it's on our farm, every time we find an extra dollar. When I'm out west and people say it's all about finding the next gallon of water, and I tell them I've spent an entire lifetime trying to get rid of water, they look at me like I've got 3 heads. But we're in a unique spot on our farm. When we find an extra dollar, we try and improve our drainage, because that is the #1 thing I can do to improve output on my farm.
Just to add to that, these wet spots that they are tiling don't grow anything. And
And you're paying taxes and everything else that comes related to that. Kind of
Absolutely.
like a wet spot in your yard. You didn't think you bought that, did you? We appreciate the opportunity to share the story that we see going on all across Ohio, and thank you for being receptive. If you've got questions, you can address them to the EPA, the Ohio Soybean Council, the Ohio Farm Bureau, or Soil and Water. They all have massive amounts of information on their websites to help better understand this story and help you be an advocate of helping to either cut off that person who seems to really want to spout about something you don't think they know much about, or ask them a question to slow them down, to at least make them think about what they're doing, because there's an awful lot of work, a lot of minds involved, and a lot of money invested in making sure that this water that comes from here is clean when it gets here, and it's clean when it leaves here, because it is somebody's home, and it's going to affect somebody's home downstream as well. So again, we appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. Hey, it says 105. Thank you.
Yep, we were right on money. On behalf of Columbus Rotary, we want to thank our guest panelists, and there will be a contribution made in your name to the International Rotary Foundation as a thank you. For those of you who are really interested in this, there are the bios of our speakers on the tables for you, so you can contact them if you'd like. Reminder, next Monday, there is no meeting here. And the following week's meeting will be Elaine Roberts, Port Columbus. Her topic is Connecting Ohio with the World. Thank you, and meeting is adjourned.